lives of the unsung heroes and heroines of our glorious history and culture of our people. On this occasion, it's my proud privilege to invite the eminent guests who have graced the evening onto the dais and request the volunteers to usher them onto the stage. Honorable Mr. Rajiv Chandrashekar, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Professor Meenakshi Jain, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, and Dr. Vikram Sampath. All the luminaries on the dais need no introduction as they are so well acclaimed. But as a matter of protocol, it's my privilege to briefly introduce them into the august crowd. While I do that, I would request Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, the Member Secretary of Indira Gandhi National Centre for Arts, New Delhi, and a scholar of history and mass communication, a writer, a poet, and an actor, to take the stage and felicitate our guests for the evening. Starting with Honorable Union Minister, Mr. Rajiv Chandrashekar ji, who is currently serving as the Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Electronics and Information Technology of India. It's my honor to welcome you, sir. I would now like to welcome the guest of honor, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, to the event. Dr. Sahasrabuddhe is the President of the Indian Council for Culture Relations, Government of India, and is also a former member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal is an Indian economist and popular historian and author of several acclaimed books. He is currently a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. We welcome you, sir. Professor Meenakshi Jain is an Indian political scientist and historian. She was nominated as a member of the Indian Council of Historical Research by the Government of India and was conferred with Padma Shri in 2020 for her work in the field of literature and education. We welcome you, ma'am. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Vikram Sampath, the author of the book, to the event. Bangalore-based historian Dr. Vikram is the author of 8 acclaimed books, out of which his 2-volume biography of Veer Savarkar went on to become the national bestsellers and were acclaimed by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji. Dr. Sampath was recently elected as the fellow to the prestigious Royal Historical Society of UK, an engineer and mathematician from BITS Pilani, an MBA from SP Jain in Finance and a PhD in History and Music from the University of Queensland, Australia. He is also a trained Carnatic vocalist who is the founder of Archive of Indian Music, India's first digital sound archive for gramophone recordings. An Eisenhower and Aspen Global Fellow and a former Senior Research Fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, Dr. Sampath is the recipient of several awards, such as Sahitya Akademi's first Yuva Puraskar for English Literature and ARSC Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book Gauhar Jaan. It's my honor to welcome you, sir. Now, I would like to request Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, sir, to address the audience for the event.
Honorable Minister Shri Rajiv Chandrashekar ji, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe ji, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, Professor Meenakshi Jain ji, and today's star attraction, Shri Vikram Sampath ji, distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, and I am quite enthusiastic to see so many youngsters sitting in this auditorium. I welcome the younger generation who are going to take forward the history of India in 2047. And that is why it is really a privilege to see so many youngsters on a book launch. It is indeed a pleasure for the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts to have this book launch here at the IGNCA. And the lady who introduced Vikram Sampath forgot to introduce that Vikram Sampath has a deep relation with Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts. So it is his alma mater. He was the regional director of IGNCA at Bangalore Centre. So he's part of IGNC family. On that behalf, I welcome Vikram Sampath here. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor to have Shri Chandrashekar ji, the Honorable Minister, who is a youngster giving inspiration to the lot of youngsters as far as the information technology and everything is concerned. Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe ji is, of course, the ICCR president. As ICCR president, he has taken the narrative of Indian culture forward beyond the borders of India and different countries. Sanjeev Sanyal ji, of course, we know him as an economist, but as an eminent historian, and he has path-breaking books on history also. And to bless us all here on this important occasion is none other than Meenakshi Jain ji, who is a stalwart as far as the history is concerned. So among this studied panel, I am only a novice to say anything about the book and about the occasion. But I must also try to tell you, especially the youngsters, that history has its own importance and there is a need to research and reinvent history every time. We should also give sufficient time to research as far as the history is concerned, because it is going to create the future of the country. We have seen the disasters happening with our countries because we did not take much of interest as far as the historical narrative was concerned, and we took history as it was told to us in previous years. Ever since India got independence, unfortunately, the most neglected part was writing history. When I get a chance to even speak before the history professors, I also say that most of you have become history professor accidentally because you wanted to qualify for some civil services examination where you took history because it is being a scoring subject and an easier subject to cram. But when you don't get selected in a UPSC examination, and because you have studied so much, you get good marks to qualify as professors and lecturers, and they don't resist, unfortunately. So, but what I see in these days, a lot of youngsters taking interest in the history, especially students who go abroad and do some work after studying in their IITs and IIMs and AIMS, and when they realized that we were never taught the proper history of the country, they feel some kind of a frustration within themselves and try to reinvent themselves. Recently, we had a workshop organized by IHER, that is known as Indian History, Academics and Research, an organization established by professionals in United States, especially Houston, where the medical professionals, chartered accountants, engineers, they have created this organization to reinvent our history. And they have remarkable studies as far as their historical pursuit is concerned. So a lot of engineers and doctors, now they are studying history. It's an important aspect, and when someone like Vikram Sampath tries to put hands on the historical discourse, it is going to be definitely something different. People who have read his Savarkar, 2 big volumes, must have realized how in-depth studies Vikram Sampath does and how how meticulously he presents his narrative. He is not afraid of facing the criticism. He is not afraid of putting the facts on the right perspective, and he is not afraid of giving replies to anybody who has any kind of a anti-national discourse. Even today, when we see the book, it is Bravehearts of Bharat and not India. That is itself a strong statement. And I must congratulate Vikram for that. He is really a Braveheart by putting his title as Bravehearts of Bharat and not Bravehearts of India. And it is the right time to think twice before we name our country. Should it be India or should it be Bharat? I am not coming to India versus Bharat discourse right now, but I am really happy that he has tried to highlight the contribution of such people who have been grossly neglected as far as the discourse is concerned. And a writer like him, who could have written on any other subject, chose to write on this subject, which is not very populist, let me tell you very frankly. So I must congratulate Vikram for his endeavor, and I wish every success to this book. When publishers like Penguin join any kind of a project, I think 50% success is assured. So big hand to Penguin also for showing courage to bring out this book. Why I am saying showing courage to bring out this book is because we know the kind of narrative which is going on within India by few people and which is being propagated by few abroad definitely should have been answered in the strongest manner as far as the narrative is concerned. I'm sure the panel today is really not only capable but enlightened to do so, and we are happy to welcome them all at the IGNCA. Once again, I thank Vikram for giving us an opportunity. This is your own house, your own institution, and to launch your book, you have chosen this institution. We are really privileged and honored. That also shows how we treat our ex-partners. So you can applaud for that. I will not mind. So we are known for keeping good relations. That is how our relationship goes on. And I must thank Honorable Minister, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, Meenakshi ji, and everyone else in the auditorium for coming to this occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. The moment that we've been waiting for has arrived. After writing 2 magnum opus volumes on Savarkar, today we all have gathered here to commemorate Dr. Sampath's, as he calls it, 8th childbirth in the form of the book, Bravehearts of Bharat, Vignettes from Indian History, which talks about the unsung heroes and heroines of Indian history who never succumbed to the challenges of the invaders. This, incidentally, also coincides with a time when we just celebrated Lachit Divas, the 400th birth anniversary of Lachit Borphukan, who relives through this new offering. Now, may I please welcome our chief guest, Shri Rajiv Chandrashekar, guest of honor, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, chair, Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, the panelists for the evening, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Professor Meenakshi Jain, and also the author of the book, Dr. Vikram Sampath, for the book launch.
Is measured, judged, benchmarked through various different perspectives and measures. But one of the easiest ways to describe a nation is by the pantheon of heroes that have served that nation, built that nation, sacrificed for the nation. And for many, many years, that narrative about India was absent. Many of these sterling lives, sterling stories. And we were limited to, like I said, living through the prism of a type of history that indoctrinated us, or in a sense led us to believe either we did not have enough heroes, or that the heroes all came from a particular lineage or a particular family. We also lived at a time when a request was made for a national war memorial in Delhi. It was shrugged off, saying it will change the aesthetics of the India Gate. I spent many years in Parliament arguing that we should have a national war memorial. And I think the full part of that 1 decade of that particular government, that we shall not name but we shall loosely refer to as a lost decade, always said, no, national war memorial, वहाँ का aesthetics खराब हो जाएगा. 1 rank, 1 pension to honor our bravehearts, naming airports, stop naming every scheme in every airport and every railway station after one more generation of a dynasty. Why don't we name it after some real bravehearts who have served and sacrificed for our nation? नहीं, छोड़ो. 1 rank, 1 pension कीजिए हमारे braveheart जो sacrifice किए हैं हमारे देश के लिए. No, some IAS officer will be upset. So anyway, I'm not necessarily here to trash any particular political ideology or political thought, but it is a basic attitude towards national service and sacrifice that we have seen in our country for many, many decades, that books like this serve to change and alter. So Vikram, first of all, congratulations for the book. I think you are doing what we ought to be doing, which is reclaiming our history one hero at a time. You've done that splendid book on Veer Savarkarji, and today you are presenting to the nation, and especially to the youngsters, young Indians, who have on their shoulder the responsibility of building the India of the Amrit Kal, a fully developed nation, a nation that is confident and will not just be a follower of other countries, but will lead the narrative of the coming decade. To them, you are showing that this is the illustrious lineage that has built India. These are the heroes that have fought for, defended, and contributed to the building of civilization in India. So congratulations for that. I can tell you that it is making an impact on youngsters, because my daughter called me this morning. She very rarely calls me full stop, but she called me this morning and said, I heard you are going for this book launch. Please make sure that you get a book autographed by Vikram Sampath. So thank you for autographing the book. And I say again, on behalf of all of us here, behalf of many, many Indians who will read this book, thank you for writing this book. More power to your pen and more power to your mind. And I hope you keep reclaiming our history one hero at a time. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring words. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe to address the audience.
Dr. Sachidanand Joshi ji, the Member Secretary of the IGNCA, the man of the evening, our very dear Vikram Sampath, Union Minister, and with whom I was in the Rajya Sabha earlier, and we used to have several exchanges since he used to sit right next to me. Of course, our Sanjeev Sanyal ji and Madam Meenakshi ji and friends. Let me start by congratulating Vikram Sampath ji for yet another very readable book, I must tell you, because as is the new kind of coinage, unputdownable. Huh? That is what they say. So it is truly unputdownable book, very lucid in style, and also something which provokes you to think about our past. As it happens, the story of any civilizational culture is kind of a continuous story. I mean, from the past through the present and to the future. And that provides you some kind of a sense of history, for which you have to have that continuity. In Sanskrit or Hindi, we call it Nitya Nutan Chirapuratan. But for that connectivity is something very, very critical. Unfortunately, what has happened is post-independence, whatever the history writing that was done, or people were commissioned to do that perhaps, the shadow of Macaulay, I think we were never able to erase. And therefore, books of this kind are really, really very important projects of demacaulayization of our thinking. And for that, hats off to you, Vikram Sampath. Why I am saying so? Because it was required. I mean, for any country that attains independence, it is but natural that you take stock of the situation, revisit the very roots of our civilizational culture, and then plan out, including the content of your textbooks, the entire education for that matter, and issues pertaining to culture and several other things. But unfortunately, looks like that was not done. I mean, it's so very painful. Very recently, Dr. Joshi, I had the occasion of visiting the Nalanda University. And you visit Nalanda University and you get down at a station called Bakhtiyarpur. I mean, there cannot be any more painful irony. You get down at Bakhtiyarpur. I am happy at least there is no statue erected over there of that great Bakhtiyar who was the person responsible for the destruction of the Nalanda University. And then you go to see the Khandahar, and then you go to the new Nalanda University. Very painful. I mean, I would definitely urge that the government should take a call about changing the name of Bakhtiyarpur. I mean, it is not something that we celebrate, the memory associated with the person called Bakhtiyar. Having said that, when you come to retelling the history kind of, and covering the parts that were kind of omitted earlier, I must say that this again is a project in the making, because while I must congratulate you for this book and your previous books, including 2 volumes on Veer Savarkar, but I think still number of things are required to be done. The nation is celebrating the 400th birth anniversary of Veer Lachit Barphukan, and I was able to attend the function today addressed by Honorable Prime Minister. Same is the story. Nobody knows about Lachit Barphukan. Happily, and I must share this here, that when I was heading the Parliamentary Committee for Education, Sports, Women, Children, we conducted a kind of hearing on reforms in our school textbooks. And a 7th standard boy approached us that I would like to depose before the committee. He has written a book, in fact, on passages or chapters that should be included in the history textbook of NCERT for class 7. And we asked him to come and depose before the committee, and I'm sure in the parliamentary history he must be the youngest person to depose before the committee and to tell the story. And he was telling me that on Aurangzeb, for example, there are at least 3.5 paragraphs, whereas on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, there are only 3 lines. So that is how the history was told to us, and we were told to remember all those kinds of things which perhaps are irrelevant today, and things that would otherwise inspire all of us and help us to look back with a sense of pride, I think were omitted. I don't know, I mean, how can we not say that there was a design behind the whole thing? There was a design, I must say. And therefore, books like these are required in a good number, and I'm sure many youngsters over here will take inspiration from you, and they will write similar kinds of books. I would also suggest all those history buffs here and friends of Vikram that things that need to come to the fore are about basically people, freedom fighters, and bravehearts who belong to disadvantaged sections of the society. I come from Maharashtra, and in Maharashtra there used to be a leader from the tribal communities. He was a freedom fighter called Umaji Naik. But unfortunately, there is very little about Umaji Naik and what he did. There used to be a lesson in our textbooks about Babu Genu, who sacrificed his life for the cause of Swadeshi in those days. Now, I don't think whether there is any biography written on Babu Genu, but that is also something which is required. So likewise, there are many forgotten heroes, and we need to throw some more light on them. Coming particularly to the book, I have few observations and few suggestions also. As I said, the writing style is very, very lucid, and it is truly unputdownable. The citations are thorough and adequate, which speaks about the depth of the research that you have undertaken. I must also say that not only the style, the references, the quotes, everything, it's something which definitely has added to the quality of the book, but also the way you have told all those stories. I mean, as we say, they are scholarly and yet popular. So scopular, I would say. So this is also something very remarkable, because people write too scholarly, and then you just cannot sustain your interest. And there are some people who write it entirely journalistic. No offense to journalists, but still. And then the research part is, kind of secondary. So you have not done that, and therefore the balance is something which is commendable. I would say that when you have said Bravehearts of Bharat, Vignettes from Indian history, you have mentioned it, that why only these and why not others? This is a question which everybody would ask and can ask perhaps. But I would only say that some rationale coming out of the prologue that you have written, which would help us to understand why only because, sometimes, and I'm sure you will also perhaps agree with me, that Chan Bibi of Ahmednagar, I wonder whether we can compare her and put her on the same pedestal that of Lalitaditya Muktapida of Kashmir. I wonder. Both may be great persons in their independent sphere, but whether we can put them on the same pedestal, I wonder. And therefore, perhaps on that count, maybe in the second edition, you may perhaps would like to have a relook. But nonetheless, I must congratulate you. And books like these should be going to places. The Indian Council for Cultural Relations will definitely try to have it at several centers of the ICCR, and we would also love if you could conduct some kind of Facebook live sessions on every other hero that you have told us about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinay sir. Thank you, Vinay sir, for your inspiring words. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Anand Raghunathan for joining with us today. Dr. Anand Raghunathan is a scientist, author, and columnist. He is currently working as an associate professor in the Special Center for Molecular Medicine at Jawaharlal Nehru University and has numerous path-breaking research discoveries to his credit. We welcome you, sir. Now, may I please request Dr. Anand Raghunathan to moderate the panel discussions on the book.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I've got a bit delayed. There was a Times Now Summit session, and sitting next to Meenakshi ji is such a relief, because there they forced me to sit next to a communist. I can still smell the sulfur. But luckily Tejasvi was there, so he kind of handled it. He said, "Ruk jao mat, jao mat." But this is a real pleasure and an honor to be on the dais and sharing platform with such luminaries. Meenakshi ji being one, Vinay ji, and the book itself. I've been reading two books at the same time. One is Sanjeev's 75 Icons. But there is no overlap between the icons of that Sanjeev has chosen and what Vikram's is. But I would leave it to the quickly go into the conduct the role of my moderation as quickly as possible, because I don't want to take time of Meenakshi ji and others, except to say that one of the most stirring chapters that I have read in history in recent times is on the Cholas that Vikram has written. And what really shocked me, of course, the concept and the kings and the empire is now in recent memory because of the film, Mani Ratnam's film. But even before that, if you remember, who was that terrorist who was hanged for the Mumbai bomb blast? No, bomb blast. Memon. Yaqub Memon, yeah, gosh, there are so many, so it's just... Memon, and recently his grave was kind of embellished and decorated, and there was a lot of controversy. And that made me look at the Samadhi of Raja Chola, and Vikram, you would have seen it. It's an absolute disgrace, I have to say this. They're like cattle, and there's like weed growing all around, and some people are even contesting whether it is the Samadhi or not. And so these are our icons that we've actually forgotten, and I think Vikram yet again has gone an extra length to kind of tell us that, look, these are the people that we must not forget if we want to, rebuild is the appropriate word, rebuild this nation. But can I now please request Meenakshi ji to have her say? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and distinguished members of the dais. It's a real honor to be here, to be participating in a function on a new best book of yours. So one bestseller after another, you really deserve congratulations. I am in fundamental agreement with your central thesis that nondescript and petty tyrants sitting on the throne of Delhi have edged out of public view rulers and dynasties of the stature of Krishnadeva and Vijayanagar. All the people that you have brought back to the pages of history, they really deserve the rehabilitation that you have given them. I want to supplement the list that you have given by some people whom we have just absolutely forgotten and who played such an important role in our civilizational journey. And since I have studied medieval India for quite some time, I would like to give examples from there. The first person that comes to my mind is Raja Dahir of Sindh. Raja Dahir, Sindh, it took the Arabs 75 years to conquer Sindh at a time when they were devastating established empires in Europe. And this resistance that was mounted by the small tiny kingdom of Sindh, it is something that we deserve to recall. Because 75 years it took to capture a small kingdom of Sindh, and even after Sindh fell in 712, it was not that it was a complete conquest, it went on revolting. But when we talk about Sindh, we must pay homage to this remarkable family of Raja Dahir, his daughters, wife, and son. Raja Dahir fought so valiantly, and when it seemed that he's going to lose the battle, his minister said, "Why don't you take shelter somewhere else?" And his words, they are recorded in a Persian text. This is not a recent invention, the Chachnama. It says that he said that the people who come after me will say, this great king, he sacrificed his life for this country. So he says that I'm sacrificing my life for my country. His family all decided that we will collectively commit suicide, emulate ourselves, but his wife is able to emulate, his 2 daughters are captured. And Mir Qasim thinks that it's a very symbolic gift to present these 2 young daughters of a Hindu king to the caliph, and he sends the girls to the caliph. And these young girls, they have had no exposure to statecraft or anything, but they are so quick-witted. When they are produced before the caliph, they say that now we are no longer worthy of you because of Qasim, Mir Qasim. That enrages the caliph, and he orders for the execution of Mir Qasim. Only later, when the execution is done, then the girls say, what kind of a ruler are you that you took our word without even trying to cross-check? So, and his son is converted. But when the Arab armies go back, he at once takes back his natal faith and mounts a real challenge to the Arabs. The second dynasty, it is so difficult to imagine that that dynasty ever existed. I'm talking about the Hindu Shahi dynasty. The Hindu Shahis, they had their capital in Kabul. When the Turkish onslaught began, then they resisted for so long, but they did not surrender, and they relocated their capital to west of the Indus, that is Hund on the western bank of the Indus. When the fight continued for a long time over there, then they relocated to Nandana on the Salt Range, and finally to Lahore. 4 generations, father, son, grandson, great-grandson. By 1027, they had all died meeting the onslaught of Mahmud Ghaznavi. And when Jaipal was the person who was captured by Mahmud Ghaznavi, he was released for 50 elephants. So when he was released, he said, now I'm not worthy of holding this noble office of king. And so he gets a fire lit and he throws himself in the fire. That is this family. And 4 generations gone, I don't want to get into the details because, time is short. But Al-Biruni, he is moved to pay them tribute. And he says, of this Hindu Shahi family, there is now no one left. It is extinct, but I must say they were men of noble bearing and noble sentiment. This is recorded by Al-Biruni in memory and in homage to a family that was actually resisting Mahmud Ghaznavi. Apart from this, there are so many rulers of this period whose names some we remember, some we don't, but they are recorded in fragments of inscriptions that were found. And the first inscription is the Kavi inscription from Broch. It is of 736. And this 736 Common Era, this inscription says that this ruler, he challenged and defeated the Arabs. The next is a very, very important inscription, the Navsari plates of Pulakeshin. It is 739. So these inscriptions, they are saying how we give details of how they were victorious over the Arabs. And the last, there are many inscriptions, but I don't want to get into that. The last inscription that I want to mention is from Attak. It is a ruler, Hindu ruler, whose kingdom was just on the border of the Arab kingdom. And he says that, I am the one who defeated these people and sent them back. So in all these narratives that we get, it is very surprising, not surprising, but it is humbling to note the identification with the land, with the culture, and with the civilization. I'll just take 2 minutes more. What I want to say is that this identification with the culture of and civilization of the subcontinent, it cuts through all sections of society. And I'll just give briefly one. There is a Sanskrit poem, that is the only copy that has survived by accident. It is called Madurai Vijay. It is by the young princess of the house of Vijayanagar. And she writes this Sanskrit poem. And she says that, the Kaveri has turned red with the blood. And in the temples, the sound of the mridang has been replaced by the halls of jackals. And then she says, Devi Minakshi, referring to the deity over there, she came to my husband, Prince Kamben, and she handed him the sword of Dharma. And she says, take it and restore this civilization in this land. So, this is one. The Sri Ranganath temple, the temple Mahamatya, has the story of a young woman. She never used to have her meal without having darshan of Sri Ranganath. The temple Mahamatya says that when Alauddin Khilji attacked Ranganath temple, this lady walked on foot all the way to Delhi searching for the deity. So, there in this Balaji, Tirupati, there is 100 verses poem in Telugu that has survived of a person who's an ordinary person, and he's saying that what has happened to my God, to my deity, I'm helpless. And then he finally, the last paragraph says, no, we shall overcome this. We will not allow the Turushkas to get the better of us. And to give one more example of every section of society, having imbued this spiritual consciousness, when Mahmud Ghaznavi attacked Somnath, and we know that the story over there. So after the Somnath temple had been desecrated, Mahmud Ghaznavi asked for a guide to show him the short route back home. And one person volunteers to show him the route back home, and the Ghaznavi army follows him. After 1 day of march, they say that now please show us an access to water because we need water. And that guide says, he's an ordinary person. He tells the Sultan of Ghaznavi, I could not protect my deity, but I can take revenge on what you did for my deity. And I've brought you on this path because there's no water here and you'll all perish. Of course, Mahmud Ghaznavi orders his head to be sartan se juda, but and this is not an imaginary something, it is recorded in Persian chronicles of that time. All the accounts that I've given you, they are narrated in Persian accounts. So I just want to make a brief this thing that all sections of society were involved. They embraced the spiritual and cultural ethos. You've done a very, very remarkable job in bringing back so many of these lost civilizational heroes. You've shown us the path. It is for us to follow and bring many, many more such people to the center stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi ji. Before I request Sanjeev to have his say, I just wanted to make one observation because while Meenakshi ji was speaking, I was doing a little bit of limited research. And as I have said before, and Vikram knows this, I've said this, nations weaken not because of their past, but rather by how they are taught it, So while I came from that hotel, Maurya Hotel, I took the Aurangzeb Lane, I took the Babar Marg, I took the Akbar Road, and I reached here. And I Googled all these 15 names that Vikram has talked about, the icons, from Lalitaditya to Raja Raja to Rani Naiki, Rudramma, Kumbha, Abbaka, Chand Bibi, all 15. Whether there is a road in Delhi named after them. And there is not a single road in Delhi named after them. There is a bridge, Baba Banda Singh Bahadur Bridge, that is also very recent, but not a single road. This is the humiliation, that we have been subjected to. And I just hope this bit of information, I can show you the Google results. Not a single road of any of these 15. Vinay Ji is here. I just hope he will gently slip this in the ear of a few powerful people, that this is the kind of change that we want. This is the change, and not the resistance to change and feeling proud that we have not changed even 1 comma in 8 years. Thank you. May I now request Sanjeev to have his say, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. Now, since I'm the last speaker, and more or less, oh, you are the last, but you are the author. So I would say that, most of what I had to say has been said, but let me begin right up front by saying congratulations, Vikram, for a great book. I've read through much of it, even before it was published. And let me say, it also has involved a new experience. So since this book has been published, many people have come up to me with it and asked me to sign it. So I said, I don't sign books written by other authors. They said, no, but you feature in the book. So for the very first time, I've actually signed books before featuring in them. And the reason for that is, as some of you may already have known, is that this book actually started with a conversation between the two of us back in 2016, where I casually made the following comment that, isn't it rather strange that we, in our history, always seem to lose all the battles. No matter when the battle happens, we always lose. So 3 battles of Panipat, we lose. 2 battles of Tarain, we lose. Battle of Plassey, we lose. It doesn't matter when the battle happens, we lose. So I was saying, but surely, since we are still around, surely we must have won some battles. Particularly since, not in every case did in fact, in many of these cases, these invading armies were vicious and they held on to power. So the fact that they were regularly evicted suggests that there must have been some kind of resistance. Even if it failed, there must have been some resistance. So clearly, Vikram took the whole matter quite to heart, and he decided to research the matter rather in detail. And so he came up with this long list of wonderful characters from history who, in many cases, successfully defended India. So it wasn't just the case that we always lost. Many of them did win. It was not just one of heroically lasting to the end. There are many, in fact, many more that I can talk about, because, in fact, many of the empires of our history, the great empires of our history, are actually directly a result of resistance to such foreign incursions. And we can go right back to the very beginning. The Mauryan Empire rose essentially as a response to the Greco-Macedonian invasion of Alexander. The Gupta's empire was a direct result of a response to the Sakas. The Vijayanagar Empire was a direct result of Malik Kafur's invasion of the south. The Mughal incursions into the Deccan resulted directly to the rise of the Maratha Empire. So this is an important lesson to be learned from this, that despite all of this, in each single case, they were either minimized when they couldn't be edited out, or their role was kind of, so to use the now dreaded term, secularized, in a way that their purpose and existence was minimized or sort of sanitized. And one example of that is, of course, the Marathas. You read our history books and you get the impression that the Marathas, so the Mughals ruled India, and a few years later, the British ruled India. The fact that there was an intervening period of about 80 years when the Marathas ruled India doesn't really come across at all. And 80 years is not a short period. The Indian Republic has still not existed for 80 years. Do remember that. So this systematic sort of changing of our history, incidentally, of course, happened under British rule to some extent. But what is extraordinary is how systematically it was done after independence. You would have thought that we would, after independence, begin to correct all of this. But some of this is actually done after independence, and including, Anand, some of the road naming. So just so that you know, not far from here is a place called Pandara Park. Actually, its name is Pandava Park. Did you know that? That is what is written in the original. That is what is written in the original documents and
I
plans.
thought it was a typo of Pandora's box or something like that.
There is nobody will be able to tell you who this Pandara is. So I actually investigated the matter. So who is this Pandara? After all, nobody seems to know any famous Pandara anywhere that we have come across. So I then looked, and in the original drawings of the city, it is actually Pandava Park. But some point in time, even having a mere mention of those who are, whether historically or mythologically at least, had set up the original settlement of Delhi as Indraprastha, even a casual mention of not a major road, just a small neighborhood, even that was quietly edited away and converted to Pandara. It is just extraordinary that this happened. And there has never been any attempt to really correct this. Except for maybe Aurangzeb Road itself has been now renamed. But other than that...
But Aurangzeb Lane exists.
Aurangzeb Lane still exists, you're absolutely right, and so does many of the other characters.
So it's like Congress Mukt Bharat, but not quite. There is still Rajasthan and...
So, well, there's certainly not Mughal Mukt Bharat, because many of the roads are still named after Akbar and Shah Jahan and so on. And it's okay to have some of them, but to have a situation where nobody else is allowed space at all is, in my view, utterly absurd. And so finally we are beginning to drag out people from history, people with whom we actually identify as opposed to these despots who conquered us, humiliated us. And whether it's our street names or our history books, we now need to reclaim them, and be able to define that narrative. So let me hand it back to Anand by saying that, look, we did this debate together in Kolkata a few months ago in St. Xavier's, which you can imagine is in the most left city in the country, and a definitely very left liberal leaning college.
Is there something about me that the leftists are attracted to? I mean, I was also left,
Yeah.
JNU.
So we were at this debate, and the topic was, should Indian history be rewritten? And you can imagine given the location, the audience, one would imagine, would be fairly tilted. But I think at the end of that debate, we won hands down with something like 70-80% of the vote. Suggests to me that the tide has genuinely turned.
Either that or the opposition that had Sanjay Jha and Manishankar Iyer was so weak. It was like India playing Namibia, Namibia being the stronger one, by the way, India's play. No, but couple of things. One thing about this is a very dangerous trend that Sanjeev has started to signing books in which he features, and I mean, he features in Caravan magazine also. And tomorrow, if Ram Guha features him, he's going to sign his book. So
why not?
Okay. But can I just pose one question to each one of you? I think this is very important, because one of the rebuttals from the left that will come almost certainly for this book, Vikram, and as for every other book that you write, would be that why do you see overwhelmingly the victories or the battles that were won by Hindu kings against invaders? I mean, you can imagine, and I'm just being a devil's advocate here, because I agree that the whole lineage of Mughals was invaders. But they will say, look, okay, Babur was an invader, but was Shah Jahan, was Akbar, later on those. So there, I think, I remember very vaguely Meenakshi ji laying out, in 10 minutes, this absolutely masterful rendition of why each one of those Mughals were actually invaders till their last genetic pool blood. So, Meenakshi ji, would you like to emphatically stomp on that and finish that debate once and for all? That there is a reason why these victories must be celebrated, because they are against the invaders that stayed and prided themselves in being separate from the Indian lineage.
Yeah, but before I come to the medieval invaders, it's mostly not remembered that northwestern India was ruled by many generations of foreign invaders in the early ancient period. But they assimilated themselves so much with the culture and tradition of this land. The Shakas, the Huns, the Kushans, none of them tried to impose any value system on the people of this subcontinent. In fact, they either became Buddhists, or they became Jains, or they became what we call Hindus. And there is no, and their coins, their titles, all that is, they take the title of Dharma Rakshak, and they have Lakshmi on their coins, the titles, and it's completely immersing themselves in the tradition of the subcontinent. And Manu, if I can just, Manu never makes a distinction between a foreigner and an Indian ruler. He says that if they are foreigners or they are fallen Kshatriyas, because at some point they stop doing their sacred duties. If they resume those sacred duties, they're like any one of us. So this same subcontinent never kept a memory of those invaders as the other. So this is one thing that the Kanishk became a Buddhist. There are inscriptions of a Greek family becoming Jains from Mathura. So there is no evidence of any foreign ruler imposing his belief system on any inhabitant of the subcontinent. So when we talk about the other, we have to keep in mind that this was not the first experience that India had of foreigners. We had experience in the ancient period, but we don't remember them as the other. Now, as far as the Islamic Advent is concerned, the fault is not ours. It is the determination of the invaders to say that we are different from you. And throughout the medieval period, you will find in Persian texts that were written in the medieval period a constant debate within this ruling class. Why are we not offering the people of this subcontinent the choice of conversion or death? This is written in the Persian court histories that were written in the medieval period. This is not my imagination. And sultans like Iltutmish, Jalaluddin Khalji, they say that right now we are like salt in a dish. We are numerically so weak. But when we become stronger, then we will certainly offer this option. Now, you talked about the example that I gave last time. This is something that is not so well known generally. The Mughal elite was horrified at the thought of inducing Indian Muslims, that is Indian converts, and any Hindu community into the political setup, the nobility. But because of certain reasons, like the foreign nobility was always rebelling against Akbar, Akbar had to bring a counterweight. On the taraju, all the weight was on one side. So he brought in two communities, very intelligent, who would never have the courage to revolt against him. One were the Indian Muslims, because they were converts, no foreign Muslim was going to follow them. And the other were the Rajputs, who were also not going to do this. Now, throughout this period, the composition of the ruling class was predominantly foreign Muslims. That means people who came from Iran or Central Asia. Now, this is something that is absolutely astounding. But what is actually more astounding is that when the Mughal Empire went into decline, after the death of Aurangzeb, we thought that Indian-born Muslims or other communities of the subcontinent would get a chance at wielding power. So, governors had to be appointed at three important provinces, Awadh, which we call UP today, Hyderabad, and Bengal. And it is surprising that in Awadh, the person who was appointed governor had come to India only in 1709 from Iran, and in 1722 he is given the charge of the province of Uttar Pradesh, and that family continues till 1857. So this obsession with a foreign identity and that we are not one of you, that is replicated in Hyderabad, where the person who's appointed governor, he comes in the time of Shah Jahan. So in another 20 years, he is made governor of Hyderabad. So, this, when we talk about them and other, we are always putting the blame on the Hindus. I'm using the word Hindu as a shortcut. But we do not examine whether the other side is willing to be accepted and assimilated. In the entire medieval period and post-medieval period, I do not know of any reform movement, so-called reform movement, within the Muslim community which said we are like Hindus. They all said don't follow Hindu practices, don't behave like their women, don't eat like them. So it was always emphasizing difference.
So in fact, this is one of those tectonic shifts that needs to happen. Because I would possibly say, one of the last nails in the coffin, because we've always been told that, they assimilated, in fact, Shashi Tharoor, they became us, that's right, yes. Whereas what you're saying is that throughout those 200 years of the Mughal rule, they prided it being, in them being not us. And they brought in the Muslims who were, not the Indian converted Muslims, to such an extent that they brought in those people to actually take the royal positions, which is quite incredible. So they are priding in not being us, and we are priding in telling them that, no, those guys are us. I mean, itna to Angrezon ne bhi nahi kiya. They also anointed some brown sahibs, and so, but the Mughals were absolutely particular in doing that. In fact, I don't want to preempt Sanjeev's new book that's coming. I leave that to him, but that again is going to be like an earthquake. And one of the things that he talks about, I don't know how much you are going to disclose, but it's about treachery, collaboration. Tell us a little bit about the thing that went upon, that was in your mind regarding that. I know we are shifting empires, from Mughal or the Muslim rulers to the British. But don't you think that kind of thread continued and allowed them to rule to a large extent?
I think this issue of collaboration is an important one. And my new book, which will be out in 4 or 5 weeks, it's called Revolutionaries, the other history of how India became free. And so it talks about how the armed struggle was an important part of the story of India's freedom struggle, and the story is told from their perspective, which looks completely different from anything that we normally read in our textbooks or in the official narrative. Now, to Anand's question, there was always throughout this a class of Indians who participated very enthusiastically in the domination of this country. And they pop up everywhere. I have, through the course of this book, mentioned several of them. It is important to remember them. By the way, let me clarify that not anybody who had anything to do with the British is a collaborator. Obviously, they ruled the countries. They would have been lawyers, teachers, even government clerks, and so on, who had to have some dealings with the British. Everybody had some. So not everybody is, a collaborator, but there was certainly a class that went out of its way to support the occupation of this country and benefited from doing so. Whether it is police informers or government contractors who went out and literally like slaves picked up young men to go to war in the First World War. And of course, do remember, particularly in the 40s when the Second World War was happening, much of the firing that was done and killings that were done against the Quit India movement or against the naval revolt were all done by young officials of the Imperial Police Service. And it is their descendants of these collaborators who then became, after independence, the intellectual class of India. In many cases, they were the collaborators themselves. And I mentioned, for example, specifically the name of Yashpal, who was then later became a famous writer, ironically based on evidently his contributions to the revolutionary movement, whereas in fact we know well documented, including from my own family's oral history, that the revolutionaries wanted to actually kill him because he was the likely source of the information that led to the death of Chandrashekar Azad, just to give an example. But take out any list of post-independence intellectuals, whether it's journalists, historians, and so on, they were themselves or within 1 or 2 generations of people who were clearly collaborating with the British to perpetuate their rule. You can do this research and Google yourself.
Yeah, in fact, I'm coming from a debate with the communists, and they were talking about how the right has never been patriotic and collaborators and all. And I just mentioned one passage from Vikram's book about the Secretary Joshi, how he actively collaborated with the British and gave away locations of INA members as well as Subhash Bose. So to that, of course, they had no response. But Vinayji, you have something to say about this, whether you see a flurry of new books coming out that aim to tell us or about what our real history is.
I see a great awakening to come out of that defeatist mentality and to be continuously under the pressure as to what would they say. If we behave in this way, what would they say? Log kya kahenge? I'll tell you 2 things. The first one is about the left. I'm sure you must have heard Cho Ramaswamy once famously saying that if left have any future in India, India has no future left. So I think that is a very prophetic, he was very prophetic in saying so. But one thing about this
Now,
mentality.
the left is there only in 3 places in India: Kerala, JNU, and the media.
And insofar as media is concerned, or rather basically our administration, the way it was tutored, I had said this in the parliament also on the debate of on the CAA, but the defeatist mentality, I'll give you one example, it will take 2-3 minutes, but it's an anecdote. I come from Thane district, and in Thane there is a place called Bhiwandi, known for riots. And in the outskirts of Bhiwandi, there are 2 villages. One is Padghe, which is on the Mumbai-Agra highway, and adjacent to that there is a village called Borivali. Not the Mumbai Borivali, this is different Borivali. So the Borivali is a Muslim-dominated area, and Padghe is all Hindu. So there was some row over the height of the masjid of the Borivali, because they were kind of adjacent. There was some clash between 2 communities, and it erupted, and a full-fledged kind of full-blown riot happened. There was one Inspector Sharma over there, and I don't know what happened, but he decided to beat every Hindu kind of activist. There was no Vishwa Hindu Parishad at that point of time. This was 1980-81. Vishwa Hindu Parishad was very young and not so much famous. And the Shiv Sena also was not that kind of Hindu organization at that point of time. But this Mr. Sharma decided to kind of settle the score with every other Hindu activist. And on the very second day, every Hindu activist was found either in the hospital or having a bandage either here or on the legs and everywhere. And the local Hindu people decided to meet with the Congress president of the district unit, one Mr. Hegde, Advocate Hegde. And they went and suggested him that do something and please remove this Mr. Sharma, because he is very venomous and he is out to kill us and all those things. You know what Mr. Hegde advised? He said, are you serious that you want Mr. Sharma to be transferred? They said, yes, obviously, beyond doubt. Then he said, do one thing, go to Padghe, and at public places, you put down banners and placards saying, Hindu hit ki raksha kaun karega? Inspector Sharma. Inspector Sharma, Hindu hit ka taranhar, something of that kind. Portray him as a pro-Hindu, and the very second day he will be transferred. And it happened. it happened that he was kind of projected as a Rakhwala of Hindus, and then he was transferred. So this is the mentality coming out of that wo kya kahenge, log kya kahenge kind of a thing. And I believe that the nation is coming out of it, and it is throwing this baggage lock, stock and barrel. I'm happy.
Fantastic. It's quite lucky that Yogi Adityanath was not a civil servant, otherwise the fellow will be roaming around India, transferred every second day. But Vikram, final thoughts on what a lot of people are asking.
Initial and final. I haven't spoken.
Oh, you haven't spoken? Yeah, you're right. Yes, absolutely. So, okay, your initial thoughts, and then I'll come to your final thoughts later on. Please. No, I mean, all right, let me, because lest I forget the question, which is that in a civilization that goes back, many people used to think 5,000 years, but now science has shown 8,000 years. Are there only 15 such icons, or is this volume 1?
Thank you, Anand. I mentioned in my prologue that, as it is, social media pe to gaaliyan milti hi rehti hain. One gaali that I have been getting is that why you've not selected X or Y or Z. I think the problem was more about whom to leave out rather than whom to choose. Because there are as many heroes, as many unsung heroes from different parts of the country. Just to give a little premise about, why this book itself was written. One, of course, as was mentioned by all the other illustrious speakers, the fact that, this narrative of a defeatist nation, of a civilization that has always covered in front of invaders. Everybody just kept coming from the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, the Dutch, the Portuguese, French, East India Company, and we were just, covering before them. That is something that needs to be challenged. And I'll give an example from just what happened yesterday with this Lachit Divas celebration, which was done in such a grand scale. I think in Delhi, to actually occupy Mindspace, Halla Bol has to happen. And right from the airport to all the bus stops, the metro stations, you had Lachit Borphokon staring in your face. I don't know how many of us in this country outside Assam really knew who this man was. But even while I was researching about Lachit itself, I saw that this was one part of the country, Assam, which never succumbed to imperialist invasions ever, barring a couple of years, maybe 5 years, 6 years. Just 2 instances. In 1206, Vinay talked about Bakhtiyar Khilji. Bakhtiyar Khilji manages to ransack the grand universities of Nalanda and Vikramshila, then goes to Tibet. Of course, that's an aborted campaign, and then he turns towards Kamrupa and invades it. The ruler there, I'll tell his name later, but followed this scorched earth policy where all the vegetation, all the water bodies on the way of the invader was completely destroyed, so much so that Bakhtiyar, who had gone with 12,000 horsemen, they literally were thirsted and starved, for resources. They were killing their own horses and eating them up. And finally, he took refuge in a dilapidated temple in Kamrupa. And before he realized, the Assamese were building a stockade around the temple. And he's so petrified that literally he runs for his life. This man who had by then occupied Bengal, in this tiny little part of what we today call just northeast, as if the whole of below the Vindhyas is south, as if all the 4 states are very, very, now 5 states are very distinctive in their culture. So this small little place managed to give this Bakhtiyar such a scare, and contrary to the usual, Indian way of following ethics of warfare, that if there's a retreating army, you're not going to attack them. The Assamese army beat them black and blue, and from this 12,000 strong force that he had, hardly 200 or 300 were left surviving, and they ran, rushing to save their life to Bengal. And the man who led this whole thing was this Raja called Prithu. Now, I don't even know if anyone in India knows who Raja Prithu was. And a few years later, 1257, there's another, the Delhi Sultanate's Bengal governor, a long name, Tughril Khan. There's a bigger name before that. He also comes to invade Kamrupa. And that time there is this Raja called Sandhya, who again, very tactically, he retreats to the hills And he's sitting there. And this Tughril Khan thinks it's a free pass, so let's take over Kamrupa. But little does he realize that from the atop the hill, there is an artificial flood that is managed. All the river bodies, they are let loose, and the entire army of Tughril Khan is literally swept away. They're taken by surprise. And then Tughril Khan himself is executed. So this place had remained so invincible to every invader who came there, and much later the Mughals from 1615, they kept trying to attack this place, and barring that brief time when Mir Jumla under Aurangzeb managed to occupy this place, the rest of Kamrupa's history has been completely bereft of all invasions. And Lachit in the 1671 Battle of Saraighat managed to give such a crushing blow to one of the largest imperial armies, which Aurangzeb very cleverly had sent under Raja Ram Singh of Jaipur. Almost, it was like a punishment posting. He knew that this man had helped sabotage the imprisonment of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and he thought that it was Ram Singh's connivance or whatever which led to him escaping from the prison in Agra. And so there was also this burning desire to put him in his place. So you go there, you'll anyway get killed by all those tribal indigenous communities. If you don't, if you actually win the war, it's still a plus. So Raja Ram Singh goes with one of the largest imperial forces, 21 Rajput chieftains, so many archers and elephants and this and that. And then this is a small indigenous group of farmers and literally the subaltern, the underdogs. And I think that story of how they rebuilt from scratch, built their little naval fleets from timber, and managed to throw this Ram Singh out, so much so that after that he never turned back at Kamrupa. This should have been a case study in management schools, in B schools, in schools and colleges as to how when a group or a community is completely pushed to the wall, how do they regroup, and in a matter of just 2-3 years they managed to do this feat. But it needed so many years for the governments of Assam to come and shout literally in the heart of Delhi to say, please hear us, we are there. Similarly, some of us come from the south of India, and the south of India also doesn't feature in the larger narrative of India. We're talking of NCRT books and so on. People will say, yeah, there is a mention. You're doing nobody a favor by mentioning them. But then it's just a map in which the Shatavahanas, the Rashtrakutas, Pallavas, Cholas, all of them are mentioned. Whereas dynasties like the Wadiyars of Mysore or the Varmas of Travancore, all these dynasties which contributed so much to the prosperity of this nation, who've added to the civilizational glory of this country, they don't get featured again. Sanjeev mentioned several times about Marthanda Varma and the Battle of Kolachal. The Dutch East India Company, by the 16th century had become one of the largest powers in global trade. They were the first to be listed on the stock exchanges. They had an axis of power that moved from South Africa all the way through Asia, even Southeast Asia, Japan, and all of that. And they were expanding at a very alarming pace in India as well. But thanks to this man who had such a little kingdom, which was called Waynard first and later became Travancore, when the Dutch governor comes to his court and says, we are going to invade Travancore, you better, stay, you better take care of it, he replies haughtily, saying, I'm also planning to invade Europe, it's just that my fishermen are just trying to make their boats ready. Once we do that, we will also do the same. And he follows it up, not just bravado. The Battle of Kolachal in 1741 gives a death blow to the Dutch, so much so that their imperialist designs in India almost collapses. The whole pepper trade, for which they made so many negotiations with Travancore, that also collapses. So anywhere else, these would be stories which we would like to, there's a very thin line between jingoism and beating your chest and Mera Bharat Mahan, everything about our past is great, the glory years when there was internet and there were, flying machines. That's not the point. But these are genuine, instances and examples of our ancestors who actually made us proud. And these were stories of resistance. As Sanjeev said, if we are around as a civilization, there must have been some wars we fought to. So I think the moot point, and that also brings the collaborators in the picture, as to why were we made to feel this heen bhavna. this inferiority, that we are no-gooders. And this was something that the colonial masters had made us believe, that right from that myth of the Aryan invasion, everybody came from outside. You people you have no reason to, or no capacity to govern yourself. And so that was so perfectly perpetuated even after independence, and that is the sad part. And I think books like this, I've mentioned in the prologue that I will be berated a lot, for many other reasons as well, that you've left Odisha in this book. There's Langula Narasimha Deva, whom honestly I had not heard of before. I believe he was one person who constructed the Konark Mandir, and he was someone who proactive. Most of these people were reactive strategies, but this man proactively ensured in the 13th century to throw away all the Turks who tried to come near Odisha and Bengal.
This was going to be my follow-up question. In fact, you preempted, because there is a difference between resistance and conquering. And which, I mean, I don't want to overlay it with the modern parlance, that I believe what the right always does is always, it's made to get busy in rebuttals. Because the other side writes an outlandish article, and then the next thing you know is the right has made them into gods and goddesses. You know, so many historians that have been made historians because of that. They peddle such utter rubbish that you're forced to rebut. So this thing of resistance and what you mentioned, that, being proactively going and conquering, there is a difference, isn't there? So, I mean, there is a book in the offing for the conquering, not the resistance bit.
I mean, in this, I do talk about the Cholas.
Yeah.
And, but there too, Anand, I think the beauty of India was we didn't go and colonize them.
It wasn't colonized.
Though Rajendra Chola in 1025 CE goes and attacks 14 ports in Srivijaya. And that itself, in the book I mentioned how in a day and age when there were no marine navigation systems, they had perfected the entire art of astronomy, looking at stars, looking at wind currents, and they knew that actually at this time of the year, I think Margashirsha Maas, in a particular, when there is Mrigashira Nakshatra in the sky, at a particular speed the wind is going to blow, and at that particular time, if your boat leaves Nagapattinam, it is going to go straight and hit Srivijaya. I mean, imagine the kind of advanced technology in the 11th century these people were looking at. But they went there, they captured it, and it was largely trade and economic reasons, as Sanjeev has so well postulated in his Ocean of Churn too, like how trade and economic history is so important, not so much of the political conquests. Along with the Fatimids of Egypt and the Song dynasty of China, the Cholas were the other major global maritime power, at least in the Southeast Asian, the Indian Ocean and the seas here. So there too, they go there, they capture, they could have easily colonized it. Rajaraja Chola goes and occupies Maldives and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, the capital Anuradhapura is destroyed and a new capital is built up there. But in their typical thing, they go and erect one Shiva temple in that long spire, Gopuram, like the Brihadishwara temple. But they don't go and colonize it. They let a local person put them on the throne as a feudatory or a vassal. A few years later, there is a revolt and that person overthrows. All that happens. But largely, at least in Srivijaya and the Malaya Peninsula, it was trade concessions that they got for the Tamil merchants. And that, osmosis of people, cultures, is one of the many reasons why I think, even to this day, that imprint of cultural imprint, the linguistic imprint that we find of India, of Tamil, of the entire Hindu culture you see in Southeast Asia, the civilizational outreach was something that was so much more important for the Indic imagination rather than, establishment of power. And the other thing that I think, I talk about Lalitaditya Muktapida of Kashmir in this book, who goes on a Digvijaya campaign across the country. Now, Digvijaya, interestingly, Digvijaya was also done by scholars. Adi Shankaracharya went on a Digvijaya. He was not a politician or a king. But Digvijaya, or winning over, was not just material conquests, but also intellectual and scholastic conquests of other people. You're convincing them to your point of view through debates, through discussions. But, even Lalitaditya, when he goes on his Digvijaya in Kalhana in Rajatarangini, paints a very, very fascinating picture of how he almost conquered the whole subcontinent. But, whatever the truth of that may be, But every place that he went, he also ensured that scholars from the conquered territories, they were all brought back to the Kashmir court. So Vakpati, Bhavabhuti, Atri Gupta, who was the grandfather of Abhinav Gupta, who started the Kashmir Shaivism school, all of them became the Navaratnas and the main gems of the Muktapida court. And so as time progressed for Tantra and Shaivism, the Vignan Bhairav Tantra being written there, Ayurveda, astronomy. So a Digvijaya did not just mean conquest and building magnificent structures, palaces, temples, which it was, and the whole, right from the Ashwamedha, this thing of conquering territory. But your kingdom's index was superior to another only if it had intellectual quality also. Which, I mean, when we say all this, they became us, etc., in those long centuries, how many universities were set up, for the people? How many centers of learning were actually set up in those 800 years? In fact, whatever centers of learning were there, they were actually destroyed. So just some, one biryani and some this thing that, I mean, these kind of examples are thrown at people's face as if a rice growing nation for centuries did not know how to throw vegetables and masalas into a cauldron and make a dish out of it, and you needed someone from outside to come and teach you the syncretic culture of how to make this. So, I mean, these examples are nice, but then what was actually done for the civilizational growth of this nation? Even, structures, including the Taj Mahal, was built at a time when the Deccan was reeling under the worst famines. So, these questions need to be asked, and I don't think they need to be looked at it's inevitable. History and politics come hand in hand, but it is unfortunate if we start hyphenating it with contemporary societies, contemporary demographics, and contemporary politics worse.
But let's be clear, Vikram, this also is a war, what is going on right now. I mean, the left versus the non-left, what to read, what not to read. And is it going to have a tragic ending, or is it, I mean, the reason why I say this is because it requires a couple of books and a couple of years for a man to have a formative, idea about where his place in history. Naipaul has written a lot about it, very authoritatively. And I think this question possibly should be taken first by Sanjeev. Will it have a tragic ending in the sense that would it have a stalemate, or where do we go from here? Because where we've reached now is at the end of 75 years of reading history. And it's like ours is a lost generation. So would we see the same thing again? I'm sorry to be ending this on a very terribly disappointing thing, but Sanjeev, what would you?
No, I actually have a very different view of the whole matter. I don't believe in the Fukuyama view that there is an end of history. This will continue in many ways. Many narratives will come and go. The peculiar narrative of the colonial history being taken forward after independence by the left is actually happened because of a particular circumstance that happened to. Usually, histories are sort of churned over relatively more in the normal course of things, as happened in most other countries like Indonesia and others. New people came, it was a newly independent, and they very quickly revised their textbooks and their understanding of their own history. So, in some ways, we were unfortunate. And we were not unfortunate because there were no people there at that time who could have told us the alternative history. The problem was they were physically evicted almost from the narrative, such as R.C. Mazumdar or B.B. Lal. So, that was how it was. But the tide has genuinely turned. And it has turned in the sense that, let's face it, there is, for a very long time, the left would mock the non-left or the right by saying, why do you criticize, why don't you write your own books? So guess what, we are now writing those books. Now that really annoys them because they began writing nasty things about both of us in Caravan magazine and trying to now fight their battles by editing our Wikipedia pages. The fact that they have been reduced to this is itself a testimony to the fact that the tide has very significantly turned. it is now possible, even though the textbooks have not yet moved, it is now possible to live in a universe where you read non-left books. And by that, I don't only mean history books. There's a whole ecosystem of literature, whether it's political theory or economics or even fiction, where you can read this other narrative. And many of these are interconnected in multiple ways. What this is leading to is, of course, all you have to do is to go to university campuses and you can see the churn of ideas. Far from being considered some kind of a pariah, even in JNU, most people on this dais who are clearly not from the left would get mobbed for selfies or signatures on books and so on. And this is quite extraordinary, particularly for somebody like me who grew up in Kolkata. And, and was, as you can imagine, given the fact that even then I had rather non-communist views, let's say, that we have come this far is quite something. And so far from being unhappy, let me say that there is indeed a new dawn, and you can feel it. You can feel it in movies that you now watch, or at least the ones that succeed. It's in the books that have turned up, the conversation that you now have without having to be apologetic. And I think that is genuinely a turn in how we think about not just our history, but ourselves.
So the glass is half full.
I think, but filling up very quickly.
Filling up very quickly. Yes.
Just one little bit I'd like to add. Usually when people get together in such gatherings, the typical tendency is to start making that voodoo doll of all the, I'm forced to take names, Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, unhone ye kiya, they did this, they did that, they distorted our history, they are historians, all these kind of names. I think that should just stop. I mean, the only answer to all of that is scholarship. Scholarship, and more scholarship. So no point going on this, childish, rant against all of them and this and that. Please read, actually read all of them. Read them more, because understand what that argument is. And then you see what is your counter argument to that, whatever has been put, replace it with facts. Every year, if 10 new books with an alternative perspective to the same thing comes forth, then I think the story will at least get balanced. And I think, on an ending note, I'd like to say that a historian needs to have extreme humility that what he or she does, the number of filtrates through which the absolute truth goes through, the sources that you refer to are so fragmented. They are destroyed over centuries of invasions and all of that. Most of the sources can also be biased. Some court historian who is praising his master and all that, those things. So the source that comes to your hand goes through so many layers of intervention in itself. Then the modern historian comes to the table with his or her own biases, political, ideological, whatever else, incompetence, lack of knowledge of a classical language, Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, you read a lost in translation document, whatever. And then based on all these different filters, just imagine what the original was and how much gets discounted till the time you actually put that on paper as the ultimate history. So tomorrow someone else finds a better source. All that we write can be thrown in the garbage bin, because that's the beauty of the discipline. Because if everything about the past is already known, then there is nothing for us historians to sit and work about.
Vikram, that's the beauty, as you say, but it's also terribly frustrating for someone who's not from the same field. And I think it's fantastic that you've now switched field, if I can say it, but you never switch field from STEM to a historian. You carry that logic and rationale with you. But I'll tell you what is frustrating. It is that I lament the lost generation. I'll explain. I mean, Churchill, the monster. He said, history will be kind to me. I mean, Manmohan Singh also said that. But Churchill said, history will be kind to me because I'll write most of it myself. And indeed, for about 40, 50 years, till the millennium, history was very kind to him. So much so that he was voted the greatest Briton in the last 2,000 years by the modern British people. it's only after a few historians they started, in fact, physicist Mukherjee, she wrote that book, and so now a lot of things that people themselves are realizing, even Brits are realizing that that guy was a true monster. But it took 50, 60 years. Now that is what is frustrating. That it is not, it won't take 5 years or 6 years or something, but it takes 2 or 3 generations, And I think somehow if we can reduce that, that would be an onus on scholars like you, but also that would be a boon for readers. That's all I'm saying. Yes. Yes, I think we would, how much time do we have, by the way? 15 minutes? Okay. So questions, please. Yes, yeah.
Gautam Chikarmane, I'm a writer. I find this discussion fascinating. Your earlier books are great. Sanjeev, yours. In fact, one of your heroes, Chand Bibi, I read about her through Amar Chitra Katha in those times. So all that aside, a lot of good work is happening in various fields. I've myself written on Sri Aurobindo reforms, etc. But a child entering a school today, a child studying in college today, continues to read the same history, the same facts, and has to regurgitate them in an examination, or even worse, for a competitive examination where he will be holding position of authority, maybe a PhD, he will be teaching students, and he will be constrained and restrained within existing intellectual walls. Now, let us even theoretically assume that the change of government and the change of government structure, which rightly you have pointed out, has not made even a comma, and they feel very proud about it, changes, and we get a new sense of history. No politics is permanent. Suppose the government changes again, suppose the ideological battles are lost, are we going to revert? My point being, where does a child source his history from? The natural sources, school, colleges, the hobbyist, maybe the books that we write, maybe at the most 100,000 people read them. What happens outside that? So are we happy doing our, in an echo chamber of GCA here, or some, a talk here and there, or a dinner, while neglecting the change in history that should happen such that the nation changes?
I don't think there is a reason to be pessimistic. Of course, questions are bound to be there in everybody's mind, I understand. But if I may say that there has been many debates around the NCERT books and the changes that are required over there. NCERT itself has accepted, and some of the changes have already happened. The parliamentary standing committees have very strongly recommended all these changes. So I don't have any reason to doubt whether these changes will happen or not. But I must say that let us not depend only on efforts from the government side. Popular efforts are also required. We need to change several things. I'll just cite one example. We are at the Indian Council for Cultural Relations have undertaken a survey of school textbooks in various countries. Because this is there in other countries also, because they source it through our NCERT. So then what those kids are being told in different countries. And it's mind-boggling to get to know how vicious things have been mentioned over there and how distortions have taken place. I mean, many textbooks in certain countries are talking about, in India there is Hinduism and Brahmanism. I mean, we are contesting it, we are trying our best, but we will have to draw a longer line also through books like Amar Chitra Katha and other sources as well, because the more we spread these sources of knowledge and understanding, the better.
I think yeah, sure, please.
I would just like to respond to your question, because I headed the committee which transformed the course at the UGC level, LOCF. I was chairing the committee for the history. And the biggest question was, can we do it? Should we do it? And why should we do it? And we did it. We did it with most of the resistance we faced among ourselves only, within the committee also. People were frightened, but we tried to change. And just try to, I'm trying to cite an example. The kind of medieval history which was taught was only a history of 187 years. For 700 or 800 years of passage, only 187 years of history was being taught. That is unfortunate. We just spread the entire thing. I said, no problem, let it be a Mughal history, but also there should be another history from 1200 to say 1700 or 1100 to 1700. Or for that matter, using the word Bharat, we introduced the first paper as the idea of Bharat. And then we said that it is an 8,000-year-old history and we should understand what Bharat is. Initially, there was resistance, of course, and the thing which worried us the most was that we did not have enough books to sort of proclaim what we were trying to add to the syllabus. So the thing which is being done here is definitely going to stay there. It's because if you have the kind of support from the back end, by way of writing books, by way of writing papers, by way of writing enough academic credentials as far as the history is concerned, I think it is going to stay. That is my perception.
I think the reason why this question is so deep and so good is because it really goes to the nub of the issue, because the problem is compounded, Gautam, by the fact that education is also a concurrent, I think it's a state subject. So even if NCERT changes things, you still have state boards. And if you have, for example, in Kerala, I mean, you can be almost certain that Kerala board will never talk of the same icons as, the other state might. So, but, I want to get away from that and get a little bit of reality check, because I have sitting next to me Dr. Jain, who was recruited by the government to do some, to change these things. Tell us about your experience, ma'am.
No, so one question for her as well. She has done remarkable books and I've read all of them. They are all published by publishers who are not part of the academic network at all. When will her book become part of a Delhi University history curriculum?
So, two questions. One is take it after you take my question, because in case we run out of time, then ignore his question. But the question is, what was your experience about you being recruited by the government to change things?
No, I just want to clarify. I was recruited to write a textbook. I wrote that textbook, and then the government fell. So my textbook was there only for a year.
Because of that textbook?
I don't know. So my textbook was there only for a year. The moment Manmohan Singh's government came back, within the first month, they said, remove these books, bring back the old books. So Romila Thapar, etc. were brought back. After that, Mummy returns. Then after that, Manmohan Singh government said, we will write new textbooks because people are fed up of Romila Thapar, etc. So they commissioned the second set of textbooks. These are absolutely fascinating because they're not written by one person like Romila Thapar or R.S. Sharma. They're written by the entire history faculty of JNU. So, and they have written in such an intelligent manner. What they have done is that they've abolished chronology. So if you have abolished chronology, there will be no outsider, there will be no insider, because we don't know who came from outside, when that person came from outside. And it is so ridiculous that Mahmud Ghaznavi is discussed in the same paragraph as Raja Raja Chola. And a student who's 10 or 11 years old is not taught about the Arab invasions, he's not taught about Turks, so he thinks that Raja Raja Chola was a ruler, Mahmud Ghaznavi was a ruler. In the same paragraph. Now you talked about the review. So when some years back, NCERT called me and said that, we are reviewing these textbooks. These textbooks means these second generation textbooks by JNU people. So I said, okay, this is something that really should attend. When I went there, I was really intrigued that there were 3 members on the panel. One was me, one was a leftist from JNU, and another was a hardcore leftist from IGNOU. So, I was going to be in a minority. So then that lady in NCRT says, please do not recommend any major changes. I said, why have you called us? She says, we are going to rewrite the book, so you only point out any error of date or some such thing. So this is how non-serious they were. But the positive thing that I want to say in answer to Gautam is that we all talk about Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, etc. But how many of us can name the next generation of leftist historians? You see, the next generation of leftist historians, the previous generation were one-book wonders. They wrote one book and they're...
There is one who is Vikram's better knower, the next generation. But yes.
Who? Oh, yeah. No, but I'm talking about Indian. How many Indian scholars can you name second generation left historians? I don't think you can name anyone. That shows that the jar is, or the mug is 3/4 full. Because there's no second generation. Whereas if you look at the so-called right, so many people are coming up. You know, like Vikram has come, Sai has come. There's so many who are going to be contributing. But after Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar, there is no left historian of that stature or caliber to hold the fort. And in fact, so many people in JNU, in the history department, they're not even one-book wonders. They've just become professors without a single publication. So there's hope for us.
We've talked of JNU so much, the poor vice-chancellor must be having hitchkeys. But yeah, student here, yeah. So, green, yeah.
Namaste, sir. Congratulations on your new book. This book is about democratizing history in India. My question is about democratizing history writing in India. We come to sources, like a lot of sources have been cited here. But here, my friends from the Stephens College or Ramjas Hindu, they will cite this particular facts. And there, they will face a problem that this is textual evidence. This is not corroborated with facts. There are a lot of limitations here. Though they have used the same resources somewhere else, but they don't point out in their publications. For example, the ICHR just recently said that they will be rewriting history using vernacular sources. Now, my question is giving a small example, vernacular sources, do we have to use this term, vernacular regional, with respect to one example? For example, Maharana Sangha ruling the Confederacy of Rajput states. He has a chieftain called Medini Rai, who is a powerful chieftain who is at one time giving a strong resistance to the Sultan of Gujarat, the Malwa, and also some, the Delhi Sultanate at one particular point of time. Maharana Sangha defeats Ibrahim Lodi twice, and at that particular time, the Sultan of Delhi, the Delhi Sultanate, is so weak, and the Confederacy of Rajput states is so strong that what is mainstream history there? Is it the Vanshavalis and the Avarkamians written in the Rajasthan side? Or is it these Persian sources in a small area in the North India, which is not even larger than the empire of Maharana Sangha and his confederacies? So the point is, what source qualifies for a mainstream history? What source qualifies for a mainstream history? Do we have sources of mainstream history? Like, what can be categorized? And if there is no such answer to this, then do we demolish this concept of mainstream histories and have multiple histories in place?
I think your question is very well articulated, and vernacular sources, what you call vernacular sources, are going to throw fresh light and bring new dimensions to history, and it will help us move away from what Vikram calls Delhi-centric. So all for it. Vernacular sources are going to open a whole new field.
First of all, it's very important to realize that it is perfectly okay to have different views of history. Just open your television at 9 o'clock. We don't even agree on what happened yesterday. So why do you get surprised that historians have different views of what happened 2,000 years ago? So I don't think that is the problem. The real problem is that in the end, whether it's historians or anyone else, everybody has a right to an opinion. They don't have a right to their own facts. And those facts must include all kinds of sources, which, and by the way, I don't like the word vernacular, because it's almost demeaning. So I was rather irritated to see it in the official announcement. It can cover any Indian language. And Indian language sources are just as valuable, including non-Sanskritic sources. They should be allowed. If anything, why not we take our own sources more seriously? After all history is written from some perspective. Why not from the Indian perspective? Why does it have to be Huang Sang's perspective of the world? So, my argument here is very simple. Put the evidence down. Then the historian can present what he or she thinks is a reasonable interpretation of the facts. Others are open to have other interpretations. If anything, the study of history becomes interesting because then you have all these dots and you can try and connect them in different ways. The problem really is, especially if you read much of these so-called left historians, is they present the facts as if this is the only interpretation possible and this is how it is. And that is really the problem, because they then do not present the facts and the fuzziness of the facts at all.
Last karna padega.
And then a question by Gautam, but please don't answer that. So just
Okay. Hi, I'm Swagat. I'm an educator. So, I mean, a really great conversation, lot to learn. I have a couple of questions which usually my students put across me. And one thing that you were talking about was reclamation of history. When Mr. Sanyal mentioned about the Pandara road and, when there's similarly something because the Mukarba Chowk, which has recently been named as the Captain Vikram Batra Chowk and so on and so forth. Now, my idea is that when we're looking at history and we're talking about reclamation, why don't we have our Bravehearts of Bharat on our currency notes? Right? There was this idea when Gandhiji was supposedly first printed on the note, that was in 1969, if I'm not wrong. I mean, that was marking his centenary. Since then, there has been no change, and barring maybe a couple of monarchies, a handful of countries who have only one person on all currency notes, I do not see that trend anywhere across the world. I mean, there are channels that have been following currencies and so on and so forth. Why don't we have that? Because I know about Rani Ki Vav, I know about Hampi, I know about so many of our cultural heritage because they're on our currency notes.
Yeah, I mean, good idea. I mean, I'm all for you. Only problem is that this may already be an idea past its prime. Maybe we'll find some way of introducing onto blockchains or something, because I mean, literally do not use any notes anymore. So maybe that is how it is. Yeah.
The thing is, suddenly if there is demonetization, then all those icons will also. You never know with Sanjeev. You want to close? Yeah, okay. So I think I'm so sorry we've completely run out of time. It gives me great pleasure again to congratulate Vikram on this fantastic evening. And thank you so much for turning up in such last number. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Kindly sign this book while I have you here.
The end of every good gathering is the beginning of better days of future. I take immense pleasure to thank our Honorable Minister, Shri Rajiv Chandrashekar, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, President, Indian Council for Cultural Relations, Dr. Sachidanand Joshi, Member Secretary, Indira Gandhi National Centre for Arts, Padma Shri Professor Meenakshi Jain, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Member, Economic Advisory Council, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, for sharing with us your views and opinions today. I would like to thank Dr. Vikram Sampath for gracing us with your most important work today evening. I am extremely grateful to the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and the Indira Gandhi National Centre for Arts and its office bearers for their generosity. Historical India for being a part and parcel of the event, and also Penguin Random House, the publisher of the book, for making the event a huge success. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to each and every one of the audience for taking your time to be a part of this and making this evening memorable. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vinay. Great pleasure. For the first time I said you were out of the window and doing the role of the... Sorry, I was a bit delayed. Real pleasure. All well? All well. Coffee पीने के लिए आना बिल्कुल.